ग्रंथ वामन गोसाई महाराज की जय। नितिल विष्णु विष्णुपाद अष्टतर शत श्रील भक्ति ग्रंथ स्वामी महाराज श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। नितिल विष्णु विष्णुपाद अष्टतर शत श्रील भक्ति प्रज्ञान केशव गोसाई महाराज की जय। नितिल विष्णु विष्णुपाद अष्टतर शत श्रील भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोसाई प्रभुपाद की जय। नितिल विष्णु महाभागवत श्रील गोक्षरस बाबूजी महाराज की जय। नितिल विष्णु श्रील सच्चिदानंद भक्ति विनोद ठाकुर की जय। नितिल विष्णु वैष्णव सार्वभौम श्री जगन्नाथ दास बाबूजी महाराज की जय। श्री स्वरूप दामोदर राय रामानंदारी श्री गौर पार्षद वृंद की जय। नाम जय श्री हरिदास ठाकुर की जय। प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासुदेव गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री क्षेत्र मंडल गौर मंडल ब्रज मंडल मथुरा वृंदावन धाम की जय। सर्व अभिष्ट विराट गिरिराज महाराज की जय। श्री राधा कुंज श्याम कुंज की जय। श्री यमुना देवी गंगा देवी की जय। श्री तुलसी महारानी वृंद देवी की जय। श्री भक्ति देवी की जय। श्री पूर्णमासी योगमाय की जय। श्री गोपेश्वर महादेव की जय। श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। समागत गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल। श्री रामानुजाचार्य की जय। तृतीय शुभ तिरुभाव तिथि की जय। हरि बोल। रसेश्वरी माता जी। ओम ज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरुवे नमः। नमो विष्णुपदाय राधिकाय प्रियात्मने श्रीमद्भक्तिवेदान्त नारायणीति नामिने। नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनिति नामिने। वंशकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपासिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। नमो महावदन्याय कृष्णप्रेमप्रदायते कृष्णाय कृष्णचैतन्य नाम्ने गौरतिशे नमः। गुरुवे गौरचन्द्राय राधिकाय तदालये कृष्णाय कृष्णभक्ताय तरभक्ताय नमो नमः। यं प्रव्रजन्तम् अनुपेतमपेतकृत्यं द्वैपायनो विरहकातर द्वैपायनो विरहकातर आजुहाव पुत्रेति तन्मयतया तरवोऽभिनेदु संसारभूतहृदयमुनिमानतोऽस्मि। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयम् उदीरयेत्। शृण्वतं स्वकथा कृष्ण पुण्यश्रवणकीर्तनं हृदन्तस्थो यभद्राणि वितनोति सुहृत्सतम्। नाष्टाप्रायेष्वभद्रेषु नित्यं भगवत सेवया भगवत्युत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी। तवैवास्मि न जीवामि त्वया विना इति विज्ञाय राधे त्वां नायमां शरणन्तिकम्। भक्त्या विहीना अपराधलक्षाय क्षिप्ताष्टकामादितरङ्गमध्ये कृपामयि त्वं शरणं प्रपन्ना वृन्दे नमस्ते चरणारविन्दम्। Bhaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare Hare. So today we are going to read about, we're going to continue reading Kapila Dev's explanation of Sankhya, which is very technical. But yesterday, today we're going to read about the characteristics of Mahatattva and Chitta, the characteristics of the false ego, and the products of the false ego in goodness and passion, and the products of the false ego in ignorance. So the day before yesterday, we read about the characteristics of the Lord and how the Lord interacts with material nature. And then we read about how the jiva interacts with material nature, how the living entity interacts with material nature. Seeing the various forms offered by material nature, the jiva becomes bewildered by ignorance. And then the bewildered jiva thinks that he is the doer of activities by false identification with material nature. This misconception leads to the jiva's bondage of repeated birth and death. Prakriti is the cause of the jiva's body, senses, and the sense devatas. The jiva has his free choice either to serve his own senses and accept a material body, or to engage in Krishna consciousness and get his spiritual body. And the Lord is the bestower of the results of the jiva's actions. And then Devahuti asked Kapila Dev to describe more about the characteristics of the material nature and Purush, the living entity who's trying to lord it over material nature. I think that's what Purush is referring to here, not the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Purush. So then there's an explanation of Pradhan, which is just everything, not the actual creation, but just everything before that, everything that is needed for creation. That's Pradhan, right? That's what we read yesterday. And the characteristics of Pradhan is that it's unmanifested, it's eternal, it's the aggregate of the three modes, it's the cause of material nature of Prakriti and the manifested stage of existence. It consists of cause and effect. It's undifferentiated, yet it has variety. And then the products of Pradhan are the 5 gross elements, the 5 tan-matras, the sense objects, the 10 senses, and the 4 antakaranas, the mind, intelligence, false ego, and chitta. So yeah, the 24 elements, the 5 gross elements, the 5 sense objects, the 10 senses, and the mind, intelligence, false ego, and the chitta, consciousness, or the heart. And then time is the 25th element. And time is the instigator of fear of death and the conditioned jivas. Time is the agitator of the material modes in material nature that leads to material creation. And time is and the Lord exists internally as Paramatma and externally as time. And then also yesterday we read about the Mahat-tattva. After the material nature is agitated by time, the Lord impregnates it with the living entities and it gives birth to the effulgent Mahat-tattva. The sum total of the cosmic intelligence is also, it is the sum total of the cosmic intelligence, also called Hiranmaya. The Mahat-tattva consumes the darkness of dissolution through its effulgence. And the mode of goodness, which is clear, the sober status of understanding the Lord, which is called Vasudev, or Chitta, manifests in the Mahat-tattva. Mode of goodness, or consciousness, manifests in the Mahat-tattva. Okay, and today we're going to read about Chitta, Ahankar, Manas, Buddhi, the consciousness, the false ego, the mind, and intelligence. And if we get time, then we can continue on to the characteristics of the tan-matras and the 5 pillars of silence. Anyways, let's just begin. Okay. So these are the 2 verses that we left off with. Thus, after manifesting varied gatedness, the effulgent Mahat-tattva, which contains all the universes within itself, which is the root of manifestations, and which is not destroyed at the time of annihilation, swallows the darkness that covered the effulgence at the time of dissolution. My screen got frozen. Okay. Just waiting for my computer to scroll down. I don't know why it's so slow. Something to do with... Okay. Okay. After the manifestation of the Mahat-tattva, these features appear simultaneously. As water in its natural state before coming in contact with earth is clear, sweet, and unruffled. Oh wait, this is where we're reading. Okay. Swajatvam avikaritvam shantatvam iti chetasa vrittibir lakshanam proktam yatapam prakriti para. After the manifestation of the Mahat-tattva, these features appear simultaneously. As water in its natural state before coming in contact with earth is clear, sweet, and unruffled, so the characteristic traits of pure consciousness are complete serenity, clarity, and freedom from distraction. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. On Radhe Radhe Garbaraj. And it just says Facebook user. Whoever said Dandavat Pranam. So Dandavat Pranam to Facebook user. That's something actually. And for those who are watching this on the Gaudiya Kirtan live page, for some reason, or the group, for some reason it doesn't show me your name. It just says Facebook user. Okay, purport. The pure status of consciousness, or Krishna consciousness, exists in the beginning. Just after creation, consciousness is not polluted. The more one becomes materially contaminated, however, the more the consciousness becomes obscured. In pure consciousness, one can perceive a slight reflection of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As in clear, unagitated water, free from impurities, one can see everything clearly. So in pure consciousness, or Krishna consciousness, one can see things as they are. One can see the reflection of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and one can see his own existence as well. This state of consciousness is very pleasing, transparent, and sober. In the beginning, consciousness is pure. Oh man, there's a verse missing there. So, one second, guys. Okay, Haribo Madhuri Didi. Okay, sorry, I can see there are not 8 lines, but there's 7 lines, which means there's a line missing here. I'm just opening it up in my. Okay. Mahatatvar vikurvanar bhagavad virya sambhavat kriya shaktir ahankaras trivida samapadyata. Let me just find this verse. Where are we? We are in. Thanks for waiting for me, guys. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, 3rd canto, chapter 26, verse 23. Yeah. Okay. Here it is. This is the missing line. Vaikarikastajasascha tamasascha yato bhava manasaschendriyanam cha bhutanam mahatamapi. The material ego springs up from the Mahat Tattva, which evolved from the Lord's own energy. The material ego is endowed predominantly with active power of 3 kinds: good, passionate, and ignorant. It is from these 3 types of material ego that the mind, the senses of perception, the organs of action, and the gross elements evolve. So we're reading about the false ego now. Three kinds of material ego. Good, like sattva, raja, tama, good, passionate, ignorant. It is from these 3 types of material ego that the mind, the senses of perception, and the organs of action, and the gross elements evolve. Purport. In the beginning, from clear consciousness, or the pure state of Krishna consciousness, the first contamination sprang up. This is called false ego, or identification of the body as the self. The living entity exists in the natural state of Krishna consciousness, but because he has marginal independence, and this allows him to forget Krishna. Originally, pure Krishna consciousness exists, but because of misuse of marginal independence, there is a chance of forgetting Krishna. This is exhibited in actual life. There are many instances in which someone acting in Krishna consciousness suddenly changes. In the Upanishads, it is stated, therefore, that the path of spiritual realization is just like the sharp edge of a razor. The example is very appropriate. One shaves his cheeks with a sharp razor very nicely, but as soon as his attention is diverted from the activity, he immediately cuts his cheek because he mishandles the razor. Not only must one come to the stage of pure Krishna consciousness, but one must also be very careful. Any inattentiveness or carelessness may cause fall down. This fall down is due to false ego. From the status of pure consciousness, the false ego is born because of misuse of independence. We cannot argue about why false ego arises from pure consciousness. Factually, there is always the chance that this will happen, and therefore one has to be very careful. False ego is the basic principle for all material activities, which are executed in the modes of material nature. As soon as one deviates from pure Krishna consciousness, he increases his entanglement in material reaction. The entanglement of materialism is the material mind, and from this material mind, the senses and material organs become manifest. Sahasrashirasham Shakshat Yamanantam Prachakshate Sankarshanakyam Purusham Bhuddhendriya Manomayam. The threefold ahankar, the source of the gross elements, the senses, and the mind, is identical with them, because it is their cause. It is known by the name Sankarshan, who is directly Lord Ananta with 1,000 heads. Okay, the threefold ahankar, the source of the gross elements, the senses, and the mind, is identical with them. Okay, because it is their cause. It is known by the name Sankarshan. Okay. Kartritvam karanatvam cha karyatvam cheti lakshanam shantaghora vimodhatvam iti vasyar ahankrite. This false ego is characterized as the doer, as an instrument, and as an effect. It is further characterized as serene, active, or dull, according to how it is influenced by the modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance. And I guess it is further characterized as serene in goodness, active in passion, or dull in ignorance, according to how it's influenced by Purport. Ahankar, or false ego, is transformed into the demigods, the controlling directors of material affairs. As an instrument, the false ego is represented as different senses and sense organs, and as a result of the combination of the demigods and the senses, material objects are produced. In the material world, we are producing so many things, and this is called advancement of civilization. But factually, the advancement of civilization is a manifestation of the false ego. By false ego, all material things are produced as objects of enjoyment. One has to cease increasing artificial necessities in the form of material objects. One great Acharya, Narottam Das Thakur, has lamented that when one deviates from pure consciousness of Vasudeva or of Krishna consciousness, he becomes entangled in material activities. The exact words he uses are Satsanga chari koinu asate vilas, te karane lagiloje karma bandha pangs. That's the song Agora Bahuna Bajiyamani. I have given up the pure status of consciousness because I wanted to enjoy in the temporary material manifestation. Therefore, I've been entangled in a network of actions and reactions. Vaikārikār vikurvāna manastatvam ajayata yad sankalpa vikalpabhyam vartate kama sambhava. From the false ego of goodness, another transformation takes place. From this evolves the mind, whose thoughts and reflections give rise to desire. So that's the next covering, is the mind. Purport. The symptoms of the mind are determination and rejection, which are due to different kinds of desires. Bhog and tyag. We desire that which is favorable to our sense gratification, and we reject that which is not favorable to sense gratification. The material mind is not fixed, but the very same mind can be fixed when engaged in the activities of Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, as long as the mind is on the material platform, it is hovering, and all this rejection and acceptance is a sat, temporary. It is stated that he whose mind is not fixed in Krishna consciousness must hover between acceptance and rejection, bhog and tyag. However advanced the mind is in academic qualifications, as long as he is not fixed in Krishna consciousness, he will simply accept and reject, and will never be able to fix his mind on a particular subject matter. Ya vidur nirudakyam rishikanam adishwaram sharatendi varashama samradhyam yogi vishanai. The mind of the living entity is known by the name of Lord Aniruddha, the supreme ruler of the senses. He possesses a bluish-black form resembling a lotus flower growing in the autumn. He is found slowly by the yogis. Purport. The system of yoga entails controlling the mind, and the lord of the mind is Aniruddha. It is stated that Aniruddha is four-handed, with Sudarshan chakra, conch shell, club, and lotus flower. There are 24 forms of Vishnu, each differently named. Among these 24 forms, Sankarshan, Aniruddha, Pradumna, and Vasudeva are depicted very nicely in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, where it is stated that Aniruddha is worshipped by the yogis. Meditation upon voidness is a modern invention of the fertile brain of some speculator. Actually, the process of yoga meditation, as prescribed in this verse, should be fixed upon the form of Aniruddha. By meditating on Aniruddha, one can become free from the agitation of acceptance and rejection. When one's mind is fixed upon Aniruddha, one gradually becomes God-realized. He approaches the pure status of Krishna consciousness, which is the ultimate goal of yoga. Taija sattva vikurvana buddhi tattvam abhut sati dravya spurana vijnana indriyanam anugraha. By transformation of the false ego and passion, intelligence takes birth, O virtuous lady. The functions of intelligence are to help in ascertaining the nature of objects when they come into view, and to help the senses. Sorry, it is. Purport. Intelligence is a discriminating power to understand an object, and it helps the senses make choices. Therefore, intelligence is supposed to be the master of the senses. The perfection of intelligence is attained when one becomes fixed in the activities of Krishna consciousness. By the proper use of intelligence, one's consciousness is expanded, and the ultimate expansion of consciousness is Krishna consciousness. Samshayata viparyasya nishchaya smritire vacha swapa ityuchate buddhir lakshanam vrittita prita. Doubt, misapprehension, correct apprehension, memory, and sleep, as determined by their different functions, are said to be the distinct characteristics of intelligence. Interesting. Sleep? Yes, you need to sleep for your intelligence to work. I don't know. Okay, let's see what the Prabhupada says. Purport. Doubt is one of the important functions of intelligence. Blind acceptance of something does not give evidence of intelligence. Therefore, the word samshaya is very important. This is cool. Doubt is an important function of intelligence. So doubt is actually a good thing. Blind acceptance of something does not give evidence of intelligence. Therefore, the word samshaya is very important. In order to cultivate intelligence, one should be doubtful in the beginning. But doubting is not very favorable when information is received from the proper source. Okay. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that doubting the words of the authority is the cause of destruction. As described in the Patanjali Yoga system, pramana viparyaya vikalpa nidrasmritya. By intelligence only, one can understand things as they are. By intelligence only can one understand whether or not he is the body. One thing regarding doubt, though, it doesn't mean that we're not supposed to question. I think doubt is automatically negative. Like, I don't believe this, but we're supposed to be more humble, like more inquisitive, and like I'm not able to understand this. Not that I don't believe this. I guess I don't know. Sorry. By intelligence only can one understand whether or not he is the body. The study to determine whether one's identity is spiritual or material begins in doubt. When one is able to analyze his actual position, the false identification with the body is detected. This is viparyasa. When false identification is detected, then real identification can be understood. Real understanding is described here as nishchaya, or proved experimental knowledge. This experimental knowledge can be achieved when one has understood the false knowledge. By experimental or proved knowledge, one can understand that he is not the body, but spirit soul. Smriti means memory, and swapa means sleep. Sleep is also necessary to keep the intelligence in working order. If there is no sleep, the brain cannot work nicely. In Bhagavad Gita, it is especially mentioned that persons who regulate eating, sleeping, and other necessities of the body in the proper proportion become very successful in the yoga process. These are some of the aspects of the analytical study of intelligence as described in both the Patanjali Yoga system and the Sankhya philosophy system of Kapila Dev in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. Ajasanindriyanyeva kriya jnana vibhagasha pranasya hi kriya shaktir buddhir vijnana shaktita. Egoism in the mode of passion produces two kinds of senses: the senses for acquiring knowledge and the senses of action. The senses of action depend on the vital energy, and the senses for acquiring knowledge depend on intelligence. Egoism in the mode of passion produces two kinds of senses: acquiring knowledge and okay, this is the Gyan Indriya and the Karma Indriya. Yes. Yeah. Purport. It has been explained in the previous verses that the mind is the product of ego and goodness, and that the function of the mind is acceptance and rejection according to desire. But here, intelligence is said to be the product of ego and passion. That is the distinction between the mind and intelligence. Mind is a product of egoism and goodness, and intelligence is a product of egoism and passion. The desire to accept something and reject something is a very important factor of the mind. Since mind is a product of the mode of goodness, if it is fixed upon the Lord of the mind, Aniruddha, then the mind can be changed to Krishna consciousness. It is stated by Narottam Das Thakur that we always have desires. Desire cannot be stopped. If we transfer our desires to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that is the perfection of life. As soon as the desire is transferred to lording over material nature, it becomes contaminated by matter. Desire has to be purified. In the beginning, this purification process has to be carried out by the order of the spiritual master, since the spiritual master knows how the disciples' desires can be transformed into Krishna consciousness. As far as the intelligence is concerned, it is clearly stated here that it is a product of egoism and passion. By practice, one comes to the point of the mode of goodness, and by surrendering or fixing the mind upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one becomes a very great personality, or Mahatma. In Bhagavad Gita, it is clearly said, Sa Mahatma Sadurlabha, such a great soul is very rare. In this verse, it is clear that both kinds of senses, the senses for acquiring knowledge and the senses for action, are products of egoism in the mode of passion. And because the sense organs for activity and for acquiring knowledge require energy, the vital energy or life energy is also produced by egoism in the mode of passion. We can actually see, therefore, that those who are very passionate can improve in material acquisition very quickly. It is recommended in the Vedic scriptures that if one wants to encourage a person in acquiring material possessions, one should also encourage him in sex life. We naturally find that those who are addicted to sex life are also materially advanced, because sex life or passionate life is the impetus for material advancement of civilization. For those who want to make spiritual advancement, there is almost no existence of the mode of passion. Only the mode of goodness is prominent. We find that those who engage in Krishna consciousness are materially poor, but one who has eyes can see. Who is greater, who is the greater. Although he appears to be materially poor, a person in Krishna consciousness is not actually a poor man, but the person who has no taste for Krishna consciousness and appears to be very happy with material possessions is actually poor. Persons infatuated by material consciousness are very intelligent in discovering things for material comforts, but they have no access to understanding the spirit, soul, and spiritual life. Therefore, if anyone wants to advance in spiritual life, he has to come back to the platform of purified desire, the purified desire for devotional service. As stated in the Narad Pancharatra, engagement in the service of the Lord when the senses are purified in Krishna consciousness is called pure devotion. Tamasaccha vikurvana bhagavad virya choditat shabdamatra abhutasma nabashrutram tu shabdagam. When egoism and ignorance is agitated by the sex energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the subtle element sound is manifested, and from sounds come the ethereal sky and the sense of hearing. Purport. It appears from this verse that all the objects of our sense gratification are the products of egoism and ignorance. It is understood from this verse that by agitation of the elements of egoism and ignorance, the first thing produced was sound, which is the subtle form of ether. It is stated also in the Vedanta Sutra that sound is the origin of all objects of material possession, and that by sound, one can also dissolve this material existence. Anavritti Shabdat means liberation by sound. The entire material manifestation began from sound, and sound can end material entanglement if it has a particular potency. The particular sound capable of doing this is the transcendental vibration Hare Krishna. Our entanglement in material affairs has begun from material sounds. Now we must purify that sound in spiritual understanding. There is sound in the spiritual world also. If we approach that sound, then our spiritual life begins, and the other requirements for spiritual advancement can be supplied. We have to understand very clearly that sound is the beginning of the creation of all material objects for sense gratification. Similarly, if sound is purified, our spiritual necessities are also produced from sound. Wow, I really like this purport. One second, I just want to save this. Come on, open up. Okay. I don't know what's up with my computer. It just freezes all the time. Can't even select it. I'll just come back to this later. Here it is said, Here it is said that from sound the ether became manifested, and that the air became manifested from ether. One second, let me just... sorry. How the ethereal sky comes from sound, and how the air comes from the sky. Sorry. And how the air comes from the sky, and how fire comes from air will be explained later on. Sound is the cause of the sky, and sky is the cause of Shotram, the ear. The ear is the first sense for receiving knowledge. One must give oral reception to any knowledge one wants to receive, either material or spiritual. Therefore, Shotram is very important. The Vedic knowledge is called Shruti. Knowledge has to be received by hearing. By hearing only can we have access to either material or spiritual enjoyment. My Palm Gurudev says a really awesome thing about this. So, let's see. Huh. I can't find it right now. That's strange. Anyways, never mind. I'll find the quote later. In the material world, we manufacture many things for our material comfort simply by hearing. They are already there, but just by hearing, one can transform them. If we want to build a very high skyscraper, this does not mean that we have to create it. The materials for the skyscraper, wood, metal, earth, etc., are already there. But we can make our intimate relationship with those already created by the material side. But we make our intimate relationship with those already created material elements by hearing how to utilize them. Modern economic advancement for creation is also a product of hearing. And similarly, one can create a favorable field of spiritual activities by hearing from the right source. Arjuna was a gross materialist in the bodily conception of life, and was suffering from the bodily conception very acutely. But simply by hearing, Arjuna became a spiritualized, Krishna-conscious person. Hearing is very important, and that hearing is produced from the sky. By hearing only can we make proper use of that which already exists. The principle of hearing to properly utilize preconceived materials is applicable to spiritual paraphernalia as well. We must hear from the proper spiritual source. Arthashrayatvam shabdasya drashturlingatvam cha tan-matratvam chanabhaso lakshanam kavayo vidu. Persons who are learned and who have true knowledge define sound as that which conveys the idea of an object, indicates the presence of a speaker screened from our view, and constitutes the subtle form of ether. Sound is that which conveys the idea of an object, indicates the presence of a speaker screened from our view, and constitutes the subtle form of ether. Purport. It is very clear herein that as soon as we speak of, I'm having a hard time reading all this up. It is very clear herein that as soon as we speak of hearing, there must be a speaker. Without a speaker, there is no question of hearing. Therefore, the Vedic knowledge, which is known as Shruti, or that which is received by hearing, is also called Apurusha. Apurusha.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Sorry about that. Apurusha means not spoken by any person materially created. It is stated in the beginning of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Tene Brahma Rida. The sound of Brahman, or Veda, was first impregnated into the heart of Brahma, the original learned man, Adi Kavaye. How did he become learned? Whenever there is learning, there must be a speaker in the process of hearing. But Brahma was the first created being. Who spoke to him? Since no one was there, who was the spiritual master to give knowledge? He was the only living creature. Therefore, the Vedic knowledge was imparted within the heart by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is seated within everyone as Paramatma. Vedic knowledge is understood to be spoken by the Supreme Lord, and therefore it is freed from the defects of material understanding. Material understanding is defective. If we hear something from a conditioned soul, it is full of defects. All material and mundane information is tainted by illusion, error, cheating, and imperfection of the senses. Brahma Pramad Vipralipsa and Karanapata. Because Vedic knowledge was imparted by the Supreme Lord, who is transcendental to material creation, it is perfect. If we receive that Vedic knowledge from Brahma in disciplined succession, Then we receive perfect knowledge. Every word we hear has a meaning behind it. As soon as we hear the word water, there's a substance, water, behind the word. Similarly, as soon as we hear the word God, there is meaning to it. If we receive that meaning and explanation of God from God Himself, then it is perfect. But if we speculate about the meaning of God, it is imperfect. Bhagavad Gita, which is the science of God, is spoken by the personality of Godhead Himself. This is perfect knowledge. Mental speculators or so-called philosophers who are researching what is actually God will never understand the nature of God. The science of God has to be understood in disciplic succession from Brahma, who is first instructed about knowledge by God. Who is first instructed about knowledge of God by God Himself. We can understand the knowledge of God by hearing Bhagavad Gita from a person authorized in the disciplic succession. When we speak of seeing, there must be form. By our sense perception, the beginning experience is the sky. Sky is the beginning of form, and from the sky other forms emanate. The objects of knowledge and sense perception begin, therefore, from the sky. I'm just seeing where we maybe okay, I think it's already is it already 8 o'clock? Oh, it's 8:03. So let's stop here for today. Now we're stopping at verse 34. We just read about the first element, sounds, and then tomorrow we can read about ether, touch, air, form, fire, taste, water, smell, and earth. And yeah, we can read up to 40. We can try to read up to 49 tomorrow. And then the day after tomorrow we'll begin Karya Shakti. All right, so thanks for joining me today. I'll do my mantra. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol. This is the quote I was looking for. Vani, or sound, is received through one sensory organ only, the ears. In other words, the other four senses are impotent to receive it. It is impossible to approach an object that lies beyond the senses through the medium of the senses. Indeed, we attain auspiciousness to the extent we are able to limit the involvement of the senses. This is precisely why Shravan, why hearing, and Kirtan, chanting, are considered superior to the other limbs of bhakti. Now this quote is starting to make more sense to me, though, because the limit we're able to attain auspiciousness to the extent we are able to limit the involvement of the senses, and the most subtle sense is hearing. That's the sense that can receive the Vani, the divine message, the sounds of Vaikuntha Varta. And then through hearing, then we can do kirtan. And so that's why Shravan and Kirtan are the most important of all the other limbs of bhakti. Shravan, Kirtan, and Smaran, the three, yeah, okay. Alright. Jai Shri Guru Gauranga Gandharvita Giridhari Shri Radha Vinod Vihari Ju Ki Jai Shri Govinda Gopinath Maran Mohan Ju Ki Jai. And this is from my Param Gurudev, Srila Bhakti Vigyan Keshav Goswami Maharaj, from his Prabandhavali. Nitil Pravishtam Vishnupar Ashtatarashatashmar Srila Bhakti Vedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj Gurudev Ki Jai. Nitil Pravishtam Vishnupar Ashtatarashatashmar Srila Bhakti Vedanta Vaman Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. Nitil Pravishtam Vishnupar Ashtatarashatashmar Srila Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Nitil Pravishtam Vishnupar Ashtatarashatashmar Srila Bhakti Vigyan Keshav Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. Nitil Pravishtam Vishnupar Ashtatarashatashmar Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Nitil Pravishta Mahabhagavat Srila Gokshivas Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Nitil Pravishta Srila Satchidananda Bhakti Vinod Thakur Ki Jai. Nitil Pravishta Vaishnav Sarvabhauma Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Shri Rupanu Varya Guru Varga Ki Jai. Shri Rupa Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jeev Gopal Pata Dashagaнаth Sharada Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai. Shri Sarup Damodar Rai Ramanandari Shri Gopal Sharada Vrinda Ki Jai. Nama Chai Shri Hairas Thakur Ki Jai. प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवाश्री गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री क्षेत्र मंडल गौर मंडल ब्रज मंडल मथुरा वृंदावन धाम की जय। सर्व अभिष्ट विराट गिरिराज महाराज की जय। श्री राधा कुंड श्याम कुंड की जय। श्री मन देवी कुंड देवी की जय। श्री तुलसी महारानी वृंद देवी की जय। श्री भक्ति देवी की जय। श्री पूर्णमासी योगमाय की जय। श्री गोपेश्वर महादेव की जय। श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। श्री रामानुजाचार्य की जय। तृतीय शुभ तिथि की जय। श्री ग्रंथराज श्रीमद्-भागवतम की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। समागत गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल। वृंदाय तुलसीदेवाय प्रियाय केशवाय कृष्ण भक्ति प्रददेवी सत्यवताय नमो नमः। वंशकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्यैव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। Oh, cool. Rukmini is joining today. Awesome. I always feel embarrassed when I speak in front of Rukmini. But she knows so much. Anyhow. All right. Thank you so much for joining. See you all tomorrow.